A chullo is a woven hat made by llama wool that is worn by Andean people to protect them from the cold climate that comes from the high altitudes of the Andes Mountains. The Andes Mountains range from Argentina to Colombia and are 22,841 feet above sea level. Thus, the people who live there must find ways to adapt to the cold and harsh climate by making warm clothes, such as the chullo. To put in perspective of how cold and harsh the conditions in the Andes are, Jason Wilson, author of Andes, A Cultural History, notes that FIFA has banned international matches being played over 8,200 feet for medical reasons, due to the harsh climate conditions of the Andes. Although the practical significance of chullos is obvious, I argue that chullos were not only used to protect Andean people from the cold, but they also played a vital role in the social and cultural identity of the Andean people during the period of colonial Latin America. The chullo is an important Latin American material culture object because not only is it representative of the Andean society, but the chullo also managed to survive through European colonization in Latin America. However, the true cultural significance of the chullo has been hidden by the rise of the market for it as a tourist item for all who visit South America, as well as the beginning of its production in Western countries today. Overall, it is important to look at the significance and history of chullos to remember the cultural background on why these material items were created in the first place, as they are still widely used today. As the different lifestyles of Europeans and natives in Latin America integrated during the colonial period, some aspects of the native culture were abandoned while some survived, such as the chullo. The survival of the chullo can be attributed to the warmth and practicality that natives and Europeans received from it. In conclusion, the cultural and social significance of the chullos have been overlooked over time by many of its users and consumers all around the world, but is still known and vital to the cultural identity of those who live in the Andes today. Chullos were also seen as indicators of one's social status, which played a role in the colonial social hierarchy. Since chullos were worn to protect people from the cold, poor rural Indian men wore them the most since they were the ones working at the higher points of the Andean mountains, thus in harsher and colder conditions. Therefore, those who worked on agriculture in the Andean mountains rarely took off their chullos due to the warmth it provided them while they worked. Chullos were also heavily decorated, often ornately adorned with white beads and the large tassels called ticas. These white beads were an important aspect to the chullo since their decoration on a chullo depended on one's social or economic status, thus acting as a status marker. The significance of the chullo in the past is evident. However, the question arises on how they avoided being eliminated during the colonization of native Andean groups. This question roots from the fact that colonists often destroyed native clothing so that natives are forced to buy and wear European clothes. My question is, why was the chullo an exception, and how did it turn into such a tourist item today, as chullos can not only be seen on the markets throughout South America, but are also sold in Western countries? This question can be answered by looking at the complexity of actually making chullos. Galvin, a history professor, explains that making chullos is an extremely time-consuming process with a complex method. He then goes on to explain the process, which includes spinning the wool of a llama to make a single strand of wool, thus creating yarn, and then dyeing the yarn by using vegetable and other natural dyes. After all of this, the yarn is spun yet again in order to create strength and elasticity. This was an extremely difficult process for the Spanish. Therefore, the Spanish realized the value of the indigenous weaving due to their unique techniques and intricate motifs. As a result, the Spanish allowed multiple isolated communities to remain untouched in exchange for the payment of tribute in the form of woven textiles. The materials originally used for creating textiles in Bolivia were llama, vicuña, and alpaca fibers. This realization led to the survival of the chullo and the beginning of societal integration between the Spaniards and natives as the trade of material goods between them began. Overall, it is important to look at the significance and history of chullos to remember the cultural background on why these material items were created in the first place, as they are still widely used today. As the different lifestyles of Europeans and natives in Latin America integrated during the colonial period, some aspects of the native culture were abandoned while some survived, such as the chullo. The survival of the chullo can be attributed to the warmth and practicality that natives and Europeans received from it. In conclusion, the cultural and social significance of the chullos have been overlooked over time by many of its users and consumers all around the world, but is still known and vital to the culture